There's also just a really simple truth that when I look at somebody else, I'm like naturally more inclined to have more insights about them than I would about myself.
Right.
It's like it's easier for me to peer into your life and see the intricacies of like what's going on with you and your issues
Yep.
than it's harder for me to do that for myself sometimes.
Yeah.
And I can get better at that, but sometimes it takes having somebody else point out something to me in order to like help me see the thing I need to see.
Welcome back to the Journey Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler.
I'm Dylan.
I'm Abigail.
Today we're talking about emotions.
Your life, your journey starts now.
This is a good way to start, I think. I will throw it to our resident licensed mental health counselor. But so in your words, Dylan, why do we have emotions? Maybe like what are they, and then why do we have them? Like, wouldn't life be easier sometimes if we could just react in ways that are perfectly in accord with reality instead of having the feelings that we do?
One of my pet peeves is when somebody says, "Oh, I'm just an emotional person." I'm like, well, yeah, of course you're an emotional person.
Right.
Like you're human. Like everybody, and of course there's a spectrum of like, well, some people feel emotions heavier than other people, and
Sure.
so realizing that we all have emotions, we might experience them in different levels, but realizing like what an emotion is, what's the purpose of emotion. The way that I really like to understand it is there's three functions of emotions. The first function is to communicate to us like information, things like safety or things like closeness to somebody in relationship with us.
Right.
Any need that we might have emotionally, we feel emotions that tell us those things. Second function is they communicate to others. So if something happens to me and I get angry, Abigail can see that I'm angry if the way that I speak or the way that I behave based on my emotion. And then third function is they motivate us for action. So I have a need that is unmet. I feel a certain way because my need is unmet. Therefore, I act on that emotion that comes from that need. And so if and really a really good way to look at this is like a feeling that my body feels physically is hunger. So my need is food. My body feels hunger. My action, my motivation is to then get food to fill the need.
Right.
So emotionally speaking, if I feel unloved, I might do something my lack of feeling unloved motivates me to do something to feel that love.
Right. To receive some kind of
So I
love.
might give a hug or have a conversation with a friend or a loved one or whatever.
Right.
Just to kind of fill that need in the moment. So I want to talk about like the root word of emotion. So the Latin root word for emotion is modus, which is movement or motion. So emotions essentially are one way to understand it is an energy that moves us in a certain direction. And we get to determine which direction we will let our emotions take us, essentially.
Yeah,
is my understanding.
That's interesting. Like, I feel like I remember, gosh, I forget. Well, it was sometime when I was in college. I was really afraid of flying, oddly enough. And there was some reason for that, right? Like I was in a bad car accident, and then the next day I got on an airplane to fly to Georgia for something, and was on just like, even by the pilot's standards, like a terribly turbulent flight. Like we didn't land till like an hour after we were supposed to because it was so windy he couldn't get down to the ground. And so that kind of coupled with the recent head trauma that I'd had, I developed this like fear of flying. And I remember talking to a counselor that I was seeing at the time for this fear of flying, because I was like, I don't know what to do with this. I've not really ever had any kind of like phobia before. Like that wasn't part of who I was. But like that happened in like February, and from that February to that December, I was going to fly on like 6 different occasions. And I was like, I got to figure this out. Like I can't just not. And so I'm talking to her, and she said something to the effect of like, well, you have to understand that like anxiety, or if we want to call it like the emotion of like worry or stress or unease, it does have a purpose. It comes from back before our ancestors had all of the amenities that we have now, where it's like, okay, you're living exposed to the elements and it's nighttime and you hear a growl and you see a pair of glowing eyes outside of your camp or whatever, like you should be worried. That will motivate, that worry
Definitely.
motivates you to self-preservation
Yep.
and protection.
Motivates us to action.
Right. And
survival.
so in survival, right? And so she's like, one of the problem arises when that same instinct in us then gets by our bodies and by our minds kind of inappropriately applied. And so it's
Right,
like
yeah.
the danger of, flying on an airplane is nowhere close to the danger of like staring into the eyes of a predator, a wild animal that's
Right.
going to kill you, or like standing on the edge of a cliff. It's like, no, all things considered, you're actually pretty safe on an airplane or in a car or whatever. And so, it's like the emotion is not necessarily bad. It does have a purpose.
Right.
But because like just the world that we live in now is different than the world of our ancestors, and some of those emotions that kind of got ingrained in us over time, we have to learn when we experience those intense emotions, like, am I responding in a way that is in line with reality? Like, oh, it's actually pretty safe to fly on an airplane. Or am I just allowing my emotions to dictate how I respond to a situation? Because sometimes the emotions that you feel are here, when the reality of the situation is
Right.
much farther down here. And so I think that's, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, the struggle comes when you have these intense emotional responses, when in reality, like what you need is actually much lower. And so, and that's helpful too, because I don't know, like I still to this day sometimes have to remind myself that it's not bad to feel emotions, but I grew up in such a way where it's like, you don't show weakness, I guess, right? Like my parents were never like, you're not allowed to cry. But I didn't ever see my dad cry until I was an adult, well, maybe like 16 or 17. So it was like just not something that, I didn't really know that. And so I think sometimes it can even make difficult emotions worse when we punish ourselves for feeling what we feel.
Right. And not allowing ourselves to actually feel the things.
Right.
Like, we can only like learn how to deal with the emotions if we have the permission to deal with them.
Right.
And things like your parents tell you it's bad to cry.
Right.
Then you learn inherently that like, oh, I shouldn't cry. That's a bad thing.
Yeah. Right.
But I think you like made like a really good point, Tyler, that like our emotions are not always based on fact, and our emotions or thoughts are not fact, but they are indicators to us that something might be going on. Because if you trace it back to the purpose of emotions is to tell us information. So our emotions are trying to bring our attention to something.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking emotions can be a cue to say, hey, you're not where you need to be right now. And I've taken that as a stepping stone of when I feel a certain emotion. There are times where I act out in the wrong way, and I can look back and say, okay, that's not what I actually needed in that moment. I needed to think through my emotions, sit down, maybe journal a bit, and then see what the next steps are. One thing that I do really like to do is I really like to write. And so I've taken a lot of different techniques in writing where even just a few days ago, I was going through my schedule and I realized I wasn't accomplishing the goals that I wanted to. So the emotions that I felt were anger, discouragement, embarrassment. And I realized this. And so I was like, I don't want to feel these anymore. And it's a cue to me to say, there's a problem here. I don't know what the problem is, but something needs to be fixed. So I took a stack of papers and I just started writing. I started writing what I wanted to accomplish, what I didn't accomplish, what the problems were, what things were happening. And I realized in my study time, I was getting distracted. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have goals. When I was going into study time, I was not prepared. And I didn't even realize this. Like, these problems weren't even in my sight. I thought I was doing the right work in the right way, but I actually wasn't. And it took my emotions to tell me that I wasn't accomplishing the goals that I wanted to accomplish.
So what do you do, like whether it's anger or sorrow or even joy, like what are some of the things that, like, how do we have a measured approach to our emotions? Because I think, sometimes I can feel at the whim of my emotions, like the emotions are in charge of how I'm feeling and acting, not, you know, me as a person is in charge of how, you know. So how do you like make your emotions work for you as opposed to like being enslaved to your own emotions? You know what I mean?
So one thing that I realized, I don't know exactly when I realized this, but everyone feels emotions like differently and at a different level. And you can feel certain emotions strongly and others not so much. And I've realized over the past few years that the emotion that I feel the strongest out of all of them would be anger, and then also inspiration. I don't know if you could consider that an emotion. Is there
I
another
think
word
so.
for it?
Yeah.
It's more complicated, but I think it is.
Yeah. And
sure.
all the other emotions that I have are actually incredibly muted compared to those two. And so whenever I feel sad, I can handle it relatively well because it's not one of my strongest emotions. I think it takes a level of introspective time to really understand, like you really would kind of need to dig deep on how you react to certain situations and what you're feeling at that moment. Because I think right now, what I've used for the emotions that I've been able to like kind of mellow out over the years is like writing, sitting and thinking. I'm still struggling with how to deal with anger. I'm still doing a lot of like different tactics with that. I think you really have to use, it's like a mixing pot. Everyone is so different. You know, I could say, use writing, like journal a lot, but other people might not find that particularly useful. And so I think you need to figure out a lot of different tactics of what so many other people have tried and figure out what works best for you as an individual.
At the very least, have a plan for when the warning sign comes on. Have a plan of like, how do I respond? If you know beforehand how you're going to respond, for you it's writing or journaling. You know, for someone else it might be like, oh, I need to get outside, or I need to exercise, or you know, whatever it is. If you know beforehand what your response to that will be, then it can be easier to not be like controlled by it because you have a plan of action ahead of time.
It's learning the discipline of not acting on your emotion immediately, because the first emotion that you feel might not be the appropriate response to the situation. So one thing that I combat, like I give this to a lot of my clients because it really helped. Like I found it to be incredibly helpful in my life. It's 3 questions. It's called check the facts skill. It's first question is, what event caused my emotion? So something happens. Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? What event triggered it? And then you ask yourself the question of, do my emotions, the second question is, what am I assuming about the event? What assumptions do I have? And then the third question is challenging my assumptions. And it's looking at, are my emotions based on my assumptions, or are my emotions based on the facts?
Yeah, what can actually be true?
Because
what actually is true?
Because the first emotion that I feel might be based on an assumption that's not actually true. And I feel what I believe. I see what I believe, and I can believe things that are wrong. And so if I believe something that's wrong, I feel very real about it. But the thing I believe might not be true.
Yeah. Right.
And so it's questioning your reality and looking at the facts of what's around you rather than just going based on what you feel in your head.
Sure.
Yeah. I think you really describe like true thinking, because like thinking actually is you kind of have 2 people in your head who are arguing different points, and you have to either agree with one, disagree with both of them, or agree with both of them. And it's very nuanced. You have to sit there and like think with yourself and actually battle with your brain and what's going on, because it's never going to be easy. There's never like a habit or a certain tactic that makes it easy. It's like you're battling with yourself, because it like you can have so many different emotions going on fighting for that place, and it can be very difficult. But there is hope, because there have been many people who have been super successful in regulating their emotions, and like average
I think
people.
Probably all 3 of us being part of that group.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an entire book in the Old Testament called Lamentations. A lament is to cry out to God. Like if you read the Psalms of David, there are so many of them where he goes, how long, O Lord, will you hide your face from me? Like, I just
Yeah.
imagine David, like, in the wilderness, being chased by his own son. This is towards the end of his life. He's being chased by his own son, who's trying to kill him and then take over his throne or whatever. And, you know, he's writing Psalms from the wilderness, and he's crying out to God, like, God, how long are you going to let my enemies pursue me? Like, where are you? I'm in complete distress. And, you know, you read that and you're like, I could see him saying, it's not like a nice, like, oh God, where are you? It's like he's screaming in pain, like real emotional pain. Like
He's in true despair.
one of his own sons is trying to kill him, you know? And so, you know, just knowing that I can take that to God has been helpful to me. In Romans 8, it talks about the Holy Spirit intercedes, which means like steps in the middle of with wordless moans and groans. Like sometimes I don't even know what to say. Like I don't know what to pray in a particular situation.
Yeah. Like the thing I'm feeling,
Right.
I don't know how to put words to.
Right. And that's okay.
And
like,
God intercedes.
I leave it up
on
to
our-
the Holy Spirit.
yeah, God
Yes.
knows.
Yes.
Right.
Gotta advocate for me.
And
Absolutely.
And you know, even in like, and that's where the growth happens. Like if all you ever do is run away from negative emotions, I think you're missing out on potentially the ways you can grow.
I think even changing the way that we categorize emotions as like positive or negative, good, bad is really important because I think especially in American society today is like we have this idea that if it's bad, I throw it out.
Yeah.
If the fruit's bad, I throw it away. If my shoes are bad, I throw it away. If my emotions are bad, I try to throw it away.
Right.
But here's a really kind of a simple way to understand what I'm getting at is like a banana is not like with a black peel is like that's gross to eat right now. Like it's not enjoyable to consume anymore because it's slimy and just disgusting and it makes me want to vomit. Right. But if I take the peel off and I use the banana in a banana bread, that's the secret to a delicious banana bread is a bad banana.
Yep.
Quotes
I want
around
banana bread right now.
So what? What'd you say?
I said I want banana bread.
You know what's funny is I had banana bread for breakfast, so maybe that's why I'm thinking about it. But
it's like, a good analogy.
But we want to throw away the thing that we perceive as bad, but it's just because it lost its value in one way, like it's not good to eat as a normal fruit anymore.
Right.
It can still be used in another way to bring beauty to something else.
Still has value.
So our
and purpose.
Even we see God has righteous anger. We see Jesus have anger, expressing his anger in the temple where people are misusing the temple, and he flips over tables and he expresses this anger in a holy way. That's like he's using anger. So anger can't just be bad, categorized as bad.
Yeah.
It's when and how we choose to use it. It's just like anything. It's something is not inherently good or evil. It's what we choose to do with the thing.
And more than we realize, and this is something even just talking to students on a regular basis, more than you realize, you do get to choose what you do with it. As much as it can feel like the emotion is choosing. The emotion is movement, or it's motivating you towards something. But like the decision that you actually make in terms of what action to take does lie with you, not with your, you can't blame treating someone poorly on anger. Like, anger may have influenced you, and sometimes we all slip up and we allow our emotions to drive us to actions that we later regret. But at the end of the day, we still do get to choose whether or not, or what action we take based off of an emotion. And it's good, maybe you guys have some thoughts on this, but just as we kind of think about closing, what are the benefits of having close relationships in your life, like a coaching type relationship or just even a peer-to-peer thing? Like, why is it important to have other people in your life who can help you like work through emotions or recognize and learn how to navigate emotions?
I think it's good to have people in your life who are gentle with you, and yet also tell you the truth, because it leads you to where you really want to go, which is having a more regulated pattern of life, having regulated habits. And one thing I've noticed, I just recently, actually on the past few days, I did tell someone who I really respect and really look up to that I made a mistake. And it was really embarrassing and humiliating. And I had to ask for forgiveness.
Mm.
And what she told me afterwards really impacted me. She said, when she said that she forgave me, and then also I was talking about it. I was like, yeah, I feel very ashamed for what I did. And she was walking me through it. She was like, yeah, I can see that you, in your conscience, you've essentially violated it within yourself. And she walked me through like forgiveness and what it really meant. And all those things like I've learned about in like Sunday school and whatnot, but to have it actually play out in a real relationship, it really teaches me how to be a more regulated person. Because after our conversation, I realized that I had been holding on to a bunch of like anger and unforgiveness towards other people. And because she forgave me, I was able to go out and take a step in forgiveness towards other people. And I wouldn't have been able to do that alone.
And it's good you had it modeled to you. It's a perfect example, right? You had it modeled to you, and then you were able to go and then forgive other people because of the forgiveness you experienced from this person, which is true in interpersonal relationships and also for people who are Christians, true of our vertical relationship with God, right? Like if you understand the depths to which you've been forgiven in Christ, then that actually frees us to be able to forgive other people.
There's also just a really simple truth that when I look at somebody else, I'm like naturally more inclined to have more insights about them than I would about myself.
Right.
It's like it's easier for me to peer into your life and see the intricacies of like what's going on with you and your issues.
Yep.
Than it's harder for me to do that for myself sometimes.
Yeah.
And I can get better at that, but sometimes it takes having somebody else point out something to me in order to like help me see the thing I need to see.
Do you think that's because your judgment's not being clouded by the emotions of the situation?
Bingo.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking
that's
too.
That's really good. I wasn't going to make that point, but you made it, and that's exactly right.
Like, I can more truthfully or objectively interpret a situation in your life because I'm not affected by the emotions that come with that situation in the same way you are.
That is a really good point.
Thanks for joining us. Feel free to check out journeycoaching.org or our social media for some more insights and resources on how you might find somebody in your life to connect with to help walk through navigating your emotions together. And we hope to see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Tune in next time and make sure you like and subscribe. Visit us at journeycoaching.org and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. Start your own journey at journeycoaching.org.
Your life, your journey starts now.